to get on with this, to resolve matters one way or another.
David Cameron, the Conservative leader, now looks set to be Britain's new Prime Minister. In Downing Street, Labour ministers recognise that for them, the game is up. There's now little chance of that lib-lab deal. The financial markets look on rather nervously. Shares lose value as the negotiations drag on. We'll have the latest on the talks. Stay with us this evening as Westminster awaits the formation of a new government. It's 5 o'clock. We're at Westminster 5 days after the general election, and it seems we're about to find out how the new government will be formed. David Cameron now looks all set to become Britain's new Prime Minister, supported probably by Mr Clegg and his colleagues. We can now forget any notion of a deal between Labour and the Liberal Democrats. Those talks have apparently come to nothing. So Nick Clegg and his team have resumed their talks today with the Conservatives, and one senior Lib Dem has confirmed to the BBC this afternoon that the Conservative offer is, and we quote, the only deal in town. We'll have the latest on the search for a deal. Before we get our first report, just let's look at the scene in Whitehall, outside the Cabinet Office. This is where the talks are taking place right now between the Conservative team and the Lib Dem team. They've been in there now for getting on for 3 hours. Quite a crowd outside, some protesters there demanding free votes, hoping that the talks include that notion of changing the voting system. So we're waiting for William Hague for the Conservatives and his team, and Danny Alexander and David Laws on the Lib Dem side to emerge from the Cabinet Office at any moment and tell us whether they've reached a deal or indeed that they are going to refer back to their own colleagues and maybe give us a sense that a formal arrangement is about to be offered. That's the scene in Whitehall. So to kick off this evening, let's have this report on the day's events, a very tumultuous day, from Colette Macbeth.
So how's it going, Mr Flynn?
For most of the morning, these men were talking to Labour.
What are you hoping to achieve today?
Then the pendulum swung back to the Conservatives, with William Hague cutting through the crowds, explaining why they were here.
As you know, we believe very strongly that there should be a government with a strong and secure majority in the House of Commons, and of course with an elected Prime Minister. We remain very, very firmly of that view. We set out our proposals to achieve that yesterday, and we have come here to hear the Liberal Democrat response.
Just before that, and round the corner in Downing Street, Labour's Ed Miliband gave an update on his talks with the Lib Dems.
I hope those talks will continue, but I thought there was a good atmosphere and a good constructive basis for our discussions.
But the fact that the Lib Dems have been talking to Labour at all has infuriated some Tories.
David Laws, one of the negotiators, said we require a bit more clarification, but otherwise very constructive, very good and so forth. And we find even at that moment in time, actually he was too timing. Now that is very bad. We were promised new politics by Mr Clegg, that he would put the national interest first. We had the disagreeable side yesterday. Most of the day was spent with him trying to horse trade between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party, not on the national interest.
Too timing, playing the field, or just taking his time in the interests of the country. Whatever it is, Nick Clegg knows he will have to commit soon.
The discussions between the political parties have now reached a critical and final phase. I'm as impatient as anybody else to get on with this, to resolve matters one way or another. My parliamentary party was up into the small hours yet again discussing things. We will act as ever responsibly. We will act to try and do our bit to create a stable, good government that the British people deserve.
Then by mid-afternoon it became apparent there was only one deal in town.
What I'm hearing now is that at Downing Street they fully recognise and understand that their side of this negotiations process is over.
In the end, it wasn't just the Lib Dem negotiators who met their Labour counterparts in there who realised a deal wasn't possible. Throughout the day, there have been more and more warnings from the Labour ranks. The Health Secretary Andy Burnham said the results of the election should be respected, while the former Home Secretary David Blunkett warned that forming a coalition of the defeated would be a disaster for the party. Their view was that Labour should regroup in opposition, and as Gordon Brown arrived back in Downing Street, it seems that he will soon be making way for a new Prime Minister in number 10. Colette Macbeth, BBC News, Westminster.
Scene there in Downing Street. So where are we this evening? For the very latest, we have our chief political correspondent, Laura Gunsberg, outside number 10. And Carol Walker is just around the corner, a few yards away, outside the Cabinet Office on Whitehall, where the Lib Dem and Conservative teams are negotiating. To you first, Carol, any sign of activity?
Well, Hugh, we're just waiting. There's a tremendous sense of anticipation and a sense of an occasion here. We've got, of course, a huge amount of media here, but crowds of onlookers, tourists, demonstrators, fair votes protesters, troops out protesters. Still no firm word from the negotiations after more than 3 hours. Now, you heard a short time ago the words of William Hague on the Conservative side as he went in, talking about how they were hoping to try to form a fair and stable government, crucially with an elected leader. And we seem in a sense to have gone full circle. Yesterday it seemed as though the talks between the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats were making good progress. We then had that moment when it was learned that Nick Clegg had been talking to Gordon Brown. We've seen today what appears to be the end of those negotiations between Labour and the Liberal Democrats, and all the focus back on the negotiations going on behind these doors here. We know also that today Nick Clegg and David Cameron have had another face-to-face meeting. It is now simply a question of whether they can reach an agreement here. It was certainly clear last night from what William Hague and others were saying that the Conservative offer was there. They couldn't really move any further in terms of the outline of what they could offer. We know that the Conservatives, to the consternation of some within their own ranks, decided to offer this referendum on a change to the AV voting system, a different voting system where each candidate has to get at least 50% of the votes. That is what is on the table. The Conservatives are not going to go beyond that. The Liberal Democrats are in that discussing that. We know that there is going to be a meeting of Conservative MPs at 8 o'clock this evening. We presume that David Cameron will address that. And we know that there will certainly have to be further meetings on the Liberal Democrat side. But the focus now is what those two sides can say when they emerge from these talks, who knows, in the next few minutes or maybe another hour or so.